Hey everybody, this is Dave, and I just got done binge watching The Flash Season 1, and I want to do a little video about the ending of it. But first I want to say that I really enjoyed the first season of The Flash. Now, I'm not really into Arrow, I haven't really watched that show, so the constant appearances from the characters from that show, especially the cheesy Felicity Smoke, were always a low point in the series for me. But I get that they're not going for a super realistic or serious tone, so when it comes to things like the fact that Captain Cold feels like a Dick Tracy villain, or that Cisco can magically create almost anything in like 10 minutes, or that Star Labs has no security and an open door policy for some reason. I just kind of have to get over those things. But the thing that really makes the show great for me, and the reason I really like to keep watching it, because of the characters, and especially the character of Harrison Wells. I really have enjoyed the slow reveal and suspense that is created in his character. And I also really enjoy the refreshing Golden Age take on the Flash as a superhero who loves being a superhero simply for the sake of helping people. We don't see that a lot in modern superhero stories anymore. Now, I really enjoyed the season as a whole, but I was just a little bit disappointed in the finale, and I was hoping for something a little bit more clever, a little bit more of a twist involving the time travel aspect. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think time travel works in The Flash, or at least what they've presented so far, and how I think that they could have done a different ending. If you haven't figured it out yet, there's going to be spoilers for the Flash Season 1, especially for the finale episode. So just to recap what happens at the end, Dr. Wells, aka Eobard Thawne, ends up getting captured, and he reveals to Barry that his plan all along was to return to his own time. So what he does is he proposes a truce, and he suggests to Barry that if Barry were to open a wormhole and access the Speed Force, that Barry could use that to go back in time and actually rescue his mother, and then Thawne could use that same wormhole to travel back to his time in the future. So he's kind of trying to propose a seemingly win-win situation. You know, you let me go back to my time, and I'll never bother you again, and bonus, you can go back and save your mom. So Barry, he takes time to consider the idea. He wants to save his mom, but he's wrestling with the idea of how he might actually alter the timeline in his own history. You know, he wants to grow up to be the person that he is today, and he realizes that his life would be very different in a world where his mother never died. So he wrestles with that for a bit, but finally, with the support of his friends and family, he decides to give it a try. So in a nutshell, he succeeds in going back in time, where he witnesses a presumably future version of himself fighting against the Reverse Flash in the living room of his old home. The future Barry downs the Reverse Flash momentarily, but just before going to take the past version of Barry, the child version of Barry, to safety, future Barry looks and notices the current day Barry, and future Barry seems to understand or know why Barry is there, and he shakes his head and puts his hand out, gesturing for current day Barry not to intervene. So then Barry, in agony, decides that he needs to trust his future self and let things play out. So Barry allows Reverse Flash to stab his mother, but what we find out is that once Reverse Flash is gone, we see that Barry's mother is not quite dead yet. And so Barry has an opportunity to have a moment with her where he says his goodbyes, and he reassures his mother that he's all right before she passes away. So then back in the present time, right before Thawne is able to enter the wormhole to head back to his time in the future, we see an emotional Barry come barreling through the time portal, destroying Thawne's transport, and then they start to fight, because now Barry evidently no longer wants to let Thawne go back to the future, and Thawne is obviously furious that Barry has just stopped him from returning to his home. Thawne gains the upper hand, but right before he can kill Barry, Eddie Thawne, who we know is Eobard Thawne's ancestor, shoots himself, because he's decided that that was his opportunity to save the day, that he needed to make sure that Eobard Thawne is never born in the future. And so Eobard Thawne then vanishes from existence, Eddie dies, and the resulting grandfather paradox that creates seems to open a black hole above the city. Now, with that said, I want to analyze why things went the way they did and how they actually could have done it differently. So first is the difficult task of determining kind of the time travel rules of the Flash television show that they set forth. Now, I know that the show isn't super consistent with time travel so far. There was the old episode where Barry went back in time, but there wasn't two versions of Barry. There wasn't a past and future version. But that's not how time travel is portrayed in the rest of the show. So maybe they'll explain that someday, or maybe that was just an inconsistency for the sake of the story. Who knows? So if we look at it, it seems to me that the approach the writers of The Flash are taking is more similar to the time travel that we see in Back to the Future than in anything else. Because in the Flash TV universe, like in Back to the Future, there's essentially a single timeline, but the single timeline is changeable. For example, in Back to the Future, the unaltered timeline had George McFly and his family growing up as losers, so to speak, until Marty went back in time and changed the timeline, after which the McFlys became a successful and confident family. The reason we know that there has to be a single timeline is because Marty's actions in the past affect his own past, which is visually represented to us by his photograph of himself and his siblings. Essentially, if Marty changes the past too much, he's jeopardizing his own existence. And the other thing about this type of time travel is things aren't predestined. So Marty doesn't instantly vanish after, say, saving his dad and changing how his parents meet, or even just going back in time in the first place, because things aren't predestined. And so Marty, even though he may be altering the past, still has an opportunity to restore the timeline enough so that the future will be mostly the same, and he'll still be born, and he'll still decide to travel back in time. So Marty's trip back in time is similar to Eobard Thawne's trip in that even though Thawne has altered the timeline, the future is still repairable. And so this is displayed visually with the future news article that Thawne continuously checks on, and which sometimes we see changes a little bit. So it seems as long as events are similar enough, Thawne's existence is not affected, at least not until something unchangeable or unrepairable happens in the time that he currently inhabits. In the Back to the Future movie, the unrepairable event would have been George's failure to kiss Lorraine at the dance. And for Eobard Thawne, the unchangeable event ended up being the suicide of his ancestor Eddie. So the depiction they used of a singular yet changeable timeline is interesting because apparently in the second season, they've already gone into the multiverse. And with the multiverse, you would think that they would have gone the route of multiple timelines. That is to say that even if Eddie had killed himself, if they had done multiple timelines, it would have no effect on Eobard, because Eddie would have just created a second timeline that does not include a future with Eobard, but Eobard's timeline would still exist in an alternate universe or an alternate timeline, so his existence would not be affected. So essentially, with Eddie's death, Eobard would still exist, but he would be trapped in this timeline where no version of himself will ever be born, and therefore he can't just travel forward in time to his old life or a life similar to his old life. So the fact that Eobard is erased from existence at the time of Eddie's death tells us that there is one timeline that's being dealt with, at least so far. So that's why with a single timeline we have this paradox that's created. Because if Eddie's death means that Eobard will never be born, then how did he travel back in time in the first place? So assuming that that's how things work in this universe, why couldn't Barry then save his mother when he went back in time? So to illustrate this, I'm going to compare Barry's situation to the story in the 2002 movie, The Time Machine. So now in that movie, the time traveler builds the time machine because he wants to go back in time and save his fiancée from being killed. But no matter what he tries to do to save her, something always happens that night to cause her death. And so the time traveler eventually learns that the reason he can't save her on that night is because if he does something to save her, then he never would have a reason to go back in time and save her. And so because he did go back in time, fate is basically intervening and making sure that the timeline remains mostly intact. However, now in the case of the Flash show, it doesn't seem like fate is intervening, and so it becomes the job of future Barry to try to stop current Barry from saving his mother. Of course, because if he does save his mother that night and she lives, then Barry would have no reason to go back in time and save her in the first place. So this could cause a paradox as well. But what Barry and future Barry failed to think of, and what I'm going to propose here, is that there was another way that he could have saved his mother without creating a world-destroying paradox. So for this idea, I'm going to reference an episode of the 90s cartoon The Gargoyles. And in this episode of The Gargoyles, the main character, Goliath, goes back in time to investigate the disappearance of a character named Griff. He does this because Griff's friends in the present day blame Goliath for Griff's disappearance. So he goes back to the night of Griff's disappearance to find out what happened, and also he's determined to try to protect him and save him from disappearing that night. So as he goes through the night, things keep happening that threaten Griff's life, and Goliath eventually determines that fate will not allow Griff to make it home that night. This makes sense because if you think about it, Goliath would have never traveled back in time in the first place to investigate Griff's disappearance if Griff had never disappeared. So, what Goliath does to get around this conundrum is he simply takes Griff with him back to the present, just after the time that he left to go to the past. And so by doing this, Griff still disappears that night, so the reason for Goliath to travel back in time still exists, but Goliath still saves Griff's life. So with that as an example, what Barry could have done is he could have waited until his mother was stabbed, but instead of enjoying a final moment with her, he could have immediately taken her to the present-day Star Labs, where he and Caitlin and Dr. Stein and Cisco could have stabilized her and saved her life. So in doing that, Barry would have, one, saved his mother, but simultaneously he would have kept the past almost exactly the same, because you see, with the disappearance of the mother as well as her blood left at the scene, Barry's dad would have probably still been convicted of her murder. Barry still would have been raised by Joe West. Barry still would have pinpointed that night as the night his mother died or disappeared, and would have still gone back in time to save her, so it wouldn't have affected those events and caused a paradox. The only difference that it would have had in the timeline is that there basically wouldn't be a body at Nora Allen's wake or funeral. Another thing is that bringing Barry's mother to the present day alive would make it a piece of cake to get his dad out of prison, since you can't be convicted of murder if the victim is still alive. Also, in coming back to the present, the urgency to save his mother in Star Labs would have overridden any desire he had to stop Thawne, leaving Thawne to return to his future, maybe, if that's what he was really trying to do, and thereby preserving Thawne, possibly the best character and definitely the best villain on the show, as a character in the show. And also it would have meant that Eddie would have not needed to commit suicide and he could have stuck around. So instead of the cliffhanger being a black hole and a grandfather paradox, cliffhanger to the episode could have been whether or not Nora Allen would pull through as they try to save her life, or perhaps Eobard Thawne does not return to his time as promised, but somewhere else entirely, causing a whole new cliffhanger of what's he going to do. But of course, if they absolutely needed the Thawne grandfather paradox at the end, then it would have been easy to still do that while still having Flash bring his mother back to the present. I think that would have been a cool, clever twist on just the time travel. It would have shown a cleverness to Barry finding out a way to get around these kind of laws that are restricting him, even though he has this power to travel through time. And, I get that they wanted an emotional scene where Barry learns to let go of his past and yada, yada, yada. But that could have always happened before that episode with his interactions with his dad or with the Wests or whoever. He could have come to that conclusion of acceptance of his past before getting the opportunity to go back in time, which then would have caused the conflict in his decision because he just barely learned to let go of the past, but now all of a sudden he's presented with this opportunity to change it. So, I was just hoping for something a little bit more clever on the part of Barry. I really wanted Barry to think outside the situation somehow. And I feel like Barry taking his mother back to his time would have achieved that. I suppose the problem with bringing Nora Allen into the present day would be the obligation to give her a story arc, and Barry's dad a new story arc as well. But that could be an interesting thing if they did it well. But, there are even ways to avoid that scenario. Like maybe they stabilize Nora Allen, but she still remains in a coma through the season 2 or something like that. And Barry, instead of visiting his dad in prison, he goes to visit his dad at the hospital, who remains by Nora's bedside at every moment. Basically would have had the same type of dynamic for Barry and his dad in that way. He wouldn't be in prison anymore, but he would still just kind of be always in a certain place where Barry could go visit him. So, a hard lesson for Barry about not changing the past is all well and good, but you gotta think about it. This is The Flash. It's a show that's about multiverses and the Speed Force and a character who sees across timelines. Time tampering is almost inevitable in the future of this show, which is basically just going to all fly in the face of Barry's sacrifice of his mother in the finale of season 1, if they keep going into it more and more. So I think a better route to have taken would have been for Barry to learn how to be a hero across time without hurting history, right? He's trying to master the time travel thing, right? Not realize that, I shouldn't mess with it, because that's going to come into play no matter what, probably. So I think, it was a nice touching moment, but the lesson learned is not really going to be applicable later on in the show. But you know what? All in all, I really enjoyed season 1 of The Flash, and I didn't hate the ending. I just was hoping for something a little bit different. And I hope that the show continues to maintain its level and even improve beyond it in season 2 and in the future. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that would have been a cool way to save Barry's mom? Or did you like better how it ended? Or do you think there was another way they could have done it? There's another way that Barry could have saved his mom or done something differently. Without too many spoilers, since I haven't gotten into season 2 yet, if you have watched season 2 or if you're in the middle of watching it, do you like the direction that the show takes after season 1? And also, what do you guys just think of the portrayal of time travel in The Flash in general? Do you think it's done well, or do you think it's too inconsistent? So go ahead and leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and share it, like it, and subscribe to my channel. All right, that's it for me.